Welcome to the Ecom 80/20 podcast, the show for brands looking to compete and win at selling online by building better customer relationships. Hosted by Isaac Hyman and Jacob Rosenberg, co-founders of HiFlyer Digital and marketing experts for 7, 8, and 9-figure brands, we'll reveal, discuss, and demystify the secret strategies that the top 1% use to acquire, convert, and retain customers better. Our mission is to help level the playing field and help you build more profitable, predictable, and scalable revenue streams for your business. Let's get started.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Ecom 80/20 podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Rosenberg, with my partner, Isaac Hyman, and we help e-commerce businesses work smarter, not harder. Today, we have another special guest, Ellie Portnoy, who I've known for probably 30 years. And he is the co-founder and SVP of Sense 360 that was recently acquired by Medallia. He is a serial entrepreneur with lots of companies started under his belt, 2 exits under his belt, and we are so excited to hear from his entrepreneurial insights and business acumen and really learn from him today, and hope our audience can do the same. Thanks so much for joining us, Ellie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get a chance to chat with you both, and especially given that we've known each other for so long, it's so great to catch up.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Always fun to see people in real life, but Zoom and catch up again after so many years. You know, when you're old enough to say that, it makes you all feel old. So we'll keep doing that, but it's nice. So tell us a little bit about your career, where it started, how you got to where you are today, and the path you took to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the concept that we live in this country and in this era in history where you can start a business where, a couple of people can get in a room, and with the power of technology and the power of just like this incredible country that rewards entrepreneurship, just start a company and build it and change an industry or create something out of nothing. And that's always been so fascinating to me. And I've been trying to do that for a very long time. So, going back all the way to high school and college, and then professionally once I was able to acquire enough means to try and do that. So I've been starting companies for a really, really long time. My early experiences starting companies were mixed at best, and that's probably putting it nicely. So my first company was a company that I started a couple of years after college, and had some ups but mostly downs with, and learned a lot and realized very quickly that there were just some very foundational business skills that I still needed to learn. So I decided to go to business school. I went to Harvard to really just try and hone in on some of those foundational skills. After that, I realized that I understood the business language and the mechanics of business, but I still didn't really understand how to build products. So I spent 2 years at Amazon learning how to build technology, how to work with engineers, how to build and scale and sell products. And then I felt like I was ready to take another crack at it. And so I started a company called Think Near, which went through a bunch of different iterations as we tried to figure out exactly what we were, but ultimately ended up being a location-based ad network, really early in the life cycle of mobile and ads, and caught a lot of really strong tailwinds. And so that was a very, very fast growing business that we ended up selling within about a year and a half of starting. So it was a really fast journey. It was really fun. It also, having such a fast journey and so much tailwind, makes it easy to hide a lot of the mistakes that we made, or not even realize that we've made some mistakes. And so had that experience, got a chance to spend 2 years at the acquiring company, which was Telenav, and learned a lot through that process as well. And then felt like I was ready to go at it again and take another crack at entrepreneurship, thinking, hey, every time I start a company, it's going to be an 18-month journey with a ton of tailwind. And started Sense 360 and realized very quickly that not all businesses have quite that same level of tailwind, and it almost never takes 18 months, and that we were incredibly lucky that it was so quick and so fun. Had our fair share of ups and downs and tailwinds, but also headwinds with Sense 360, and ultimately netted out being a data company where we ingested a whole bunch of really new types of data that were just starting to emerge: location data, debit card and credit card data, survey data, as many data sets as we could find. We brought them together and we created and built dashboards that were real-time views for big enterprises to use as they thought about who their customer is and how they should best serve them and what types of products they want, and had success selling that into large enterprises, mostly restaurants and retailers, who ended up being our big customers. And then at some point about a year and a half ago, Medallia came to us and said, hey, we'd love to work together. And one thing led to another, and we ultimately became part of Medallia as part of an acquisition that they made of our company. And so now I'm at Medallia helping to continue to build out Sense 360 and a lot of the market research efforts that Medallia is building. And that takes us to today.
Wow, that's awesome.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I mean, yeah, you guys go way back, I could tell already. And, one thing we actually tell a lot of clients out there is that, there's everyone's, especially considering we're on the agency side, and you're an entrepreneur, you probably see this as well. We tell them that we have an opinion, our side has an opinion, the client has an opinion, but the tiebreaker in all that opinion is the data, right? How important is it for a brand right now to be data-driven and kind of customer-centric, in your opinion?
I mean, I think it's not only critical, it's probably the most important skill set that companies need to have in today's environment. And I saw this firsthand at Amazon. What was so interesting to me about that experience was that everything started with the customer at Amazon. There wasn't a conversation, there wasn't you just couldn't talk in the four walls of Amazon without starting with who is the customer, what does the customer want, what's best for the customer. And so that customer centricity was super critical, but it was always backed by data. It was never just like, I think a customer will want this. It was always like, we're running experiments, we're looking at the customer service data, we're looking at these internal metrics we have. And that was what was so powerful about getting to work at Amazon, is when we were building the product, we started with the customer and we backed it up with data. And I think every company that wants to compete in an environment where Amazon is absolutely everywhere and it's a competitor no matter what business you're in, that you take that same approach and you start with the customer and you use data to back it up. And in many ways, that was the starting point for both of my businesses, were to say, I've seen how Amazon does this. I see how critical it is for every company to operate at the same level or die. And how do I bring data to these companies that are not Amazon, and how do I help them take a customer-centric approach? So I think it's absolutely spot on and critical.
I mean, it's really fascinating to hear this, because Amazon is now, probably the biggest retailer, biggest company out there when it comes to consumer products. But your experience goes back all the way back to 2009, 2011. You're talking about 11 years ago. So how much of that do you feel like is translated even today in the way that Amazon does it and in the way that you're doing your own businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think Amazon has evolved quite a bit in the last 10, 11 years as they've gotten into more businesses and they've refined their own processes, and things have changed. And I try to stay on top of how they're evolving. But the reality is DNA doesn't change that often. And 10 years is a very short amount of time when it comes to like the DNA of a company. And it was so baked into their DNA that almost all of the evolution that has happened has been on the outside of how do you make our customer centricity better? How do you make our data approach better? But it's never fundamentally changed. Like that is who they are. And that's why they've been so successful. And you can see it in every new product that they've launched. It starts with the customer. It starts with the PRFAQ, which I'm guessing most of you know what that is, but it really comes down to when they launch a new feature, they start by writing the press release that they're going to use when that feature launches to even figure out if customers would be excited about it. That level of like ingrained customer centricity and approach to data has been there 10, 11 years ago, and I know continues to be a core part of their DNA and a core part of their success.
That's great. I really appreciate that, Isaac. We always talk about the data being the tiebreaker, as well as, one of our taglines is building better customer relationships. And if it's not revolving around the customer, then it's just, you're just, spinning your wheels and, hoping for the best. So let's go back a little bit more into some of your past experiences. Talk about what exactly was ThinkNear in terms of the mobile ad platform, how you came up with that idea, how you scaled it so quickly, and then obviously how you ultimately had that acquired.
Yeah, so the story of ThinkNear actually starts at Amazon, where as part of my job at Amazon, I was trying to understand how to evolve Amazon's pricing strategy for a specific product I was working at. And the more I dove into pricing at Amazon, the more I realized that Amazon was just an incredibly sophisticated organization as it related to pricing. Pricing was done by looking at a lot of data, but also by being extremely customer centric and really thinking about what is best for the customer. And I felt like most companies were not doing that. So the initial version of Think Here was building a pricing engine that took that customer centricity, took that data, and helped smaller businesses apply that in their pricing decisions. Ended up being a very, very hard business to build, and we very quickly pivoted out of that. And the way we pivoted out was the pricing engine that we were working on basically looked at all these different data sets and would automatically start changing the price on things, but it was very hard for us to get that price in front of consumers to try to get them to buy. We didn't have hundreds of millions of people coming into our site, looking at things and then deciding based on price. These small businesses needed to go out and proactively reach consumers. And the way we were trying to do that was by plugging into a bunch of ad networks and saying, hey, go and show this ad to people in real time as soon as like we wanted to like discount something. And the more we tried to hook into those integrations and into those ad networks, the more we realized like they were very good at doing real-time ads. They were very bad at doing real-time location-based ads. And most of our customers were local retailers and local restaurants, and they needed to be able to show those ads only to people who are within a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles of their locations. And when we realized that the ad networks couldn't do that, we said, that's our business. We're going to build the infrastructure to empower and enable businesses to show ads with a very, very tight geographic radius. And as we started to build that, we started to realize like, hey, actually, this is much bigger than just being able to show ads nearby. What we're really doing is we're creating the infrastructure to empower mobile ads, because most of the people who were thinking about mobile ads at that point were saying, hey, we've got this entire ad ecosystem online that works really well. We want to take that and basically shrink it to fit on a mobile phone. And as we started to get into the infrastructure, we started to realize like, hey, actually, mobile devices are not small computers. There's something totally unique where they're personal, they're portable, they have a GPS in them. We're taking them everywhere we can. And as an advertiser, you shouldn't just try to replicate what worked on desktop. You should lean into these advantages and start to think about how location plays a role in that customer journey that people are on. And so if I used to think of the example of like the 34th Street in Manhattan, where there's some guy selling sunglasses and purses and all these different things. And then all of a sudden it starts to rain and they flip their cart over and they start to sell umbrellas. And my pitch to advertisers were, on a mobile device, you actually know where the person is, you know what's happening around them, make sure your ad is relevant to them at that very specific moment. And that's completely different from the way people were thinking about online ads at the moment and trying to port them to the mobile device. So the business started doing pricing, started from the insights I had at Amazon, but it ultimately evolved into a new paradigm for how mobile ads should be delivered. And that was kind of the journey. That was it was crazy to do that in an 18-month time frame. It was very jarring.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, the way that you can, number one, realize where the pain point was and then pivot so quickly is to be able to solve that pain point. Really, really amazing job. It makes me think of like Groupon, right? It's more like location-based advertising, but also not necessarily a service, more whatever that they can use it for.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things I often get introspective about when thinking about that journey is like, what was it that allowed us to move so quickly and iterate and pivot and kind of find our way in such a short period of time? And I think it comes down to that 80-20 rule that I know you guys care so much about and think a lot about. And it really is the essence of startups and entrepreneurship, where no company will ever beat Amazon or Walmart or Target when it comes to resources and when it comes to the amount of data they have and like all of the benefits and advantages that you get from being such a big company. The one advantage startups have is speed. The one advantage they have is the ability to move quickly from A to B much, much, much faster than any big company ever can. And I was at Amazon. It's a fast company, but it just cannot move as fast as a small company because it's just got legacy businesses. It's got tons of people. It's got process. It's got to protect the brand. And so as a startup, the only way that you can really lean into that speed advantage is to take that 80-20 rule and say, what am I going to focus on that's going to have the most impact? And what are all the things that I can just avoid doing because they might be important, but they're not critical? And I think it's just so important in the entrepreneurial journey, and basically for any business that's not a Fortune 500 company, to just lean into that speed advantage as much as they can through the 80-20 rule.
Wow, that's definitely a powerful testament to the 80-20 rule and how being customer centric is so important to businesses. What's funny is that I actually shared some office space with the guy who sold those umbrellas to those little bodegas on the corner. So I know exactly what you mean. Every time it was raining, there was boxes outside his door stacked with those. And then when it was sunny, it was like, drinks and tchotchkes and all that. So fascinating you said that. Also fascinating how you're a true tech entrepreneur, in that you have that test, learn, refine approach to the business, and refining it within just like 18, 19 months. But it seems like also like you became, through Think Near and also Sense 360, you became like the hero for the small business, for that kind of local brick and mortar store who needs help, that restaurant, that small retailer. How has that kind of played a role in competing with Amazon, or has that helped their business grow better than before?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a hero to them, because I tried to build services that would help them. And it was tough. And in both cases, we actually pivoted away from helping small businesses. At Think Near, we ultimately worked mostly with bigger companies through their ad spend. And in Sense 360, most of our customers were larger companies. So I'm hoping that my third crack at it will involve small businesses, and I'll find a way to actually build products for them that will help them better compete with the bigger folks. I think small business have several advantages. The first one we talked about is speed, and I think they really need to lean into it. I think the second one is flexibility and the fact that they can be nimble. I think it does come back to that analogy of the guy selling umbrellas versus sunglasses. Most big companies can't do that. They can't change that quickly. They can't adjust to the market, to the consumer, and they mostly don't know their consumer. They're making decisions in a centralized location and then sending that information out, or that decision, to thousands of different locations, and they have no context about what's happening in each one of them. Whereas the small business really can be way more fluid, way more flexible, and use all of the context and information they have. And I think a better way of saying it is they can build one-on-one relationships with all of their customers. And I think they have to lean into it. So when I think about, like, whether it be what products they have to use that context, that customer centricity, the data that they have of the underlying customers. And that means building out actual data about those customers and actual relationships with those customers. And then when it comes to marketing to them, they have to make that a one-on-one conversation, rather than what a big company will do, which is just like mass mail out and try to personalize, but it's just not the same as what a small company can do. So what you guys are doing really resonates with me, because it's just so critical to the small business. So while I haven't been a hero to small businesses, I'm happy to hear that you guys are being heroes to them, and that's been very cool to see.
And thanks. We're trying. We are working with small to medium businesses, but yeah, that's something our goal really is, to help the little guys almost compete with the big guys. Isaac's core line is the secrets and the strategies of the 1%, bring them to everyone to share that success. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly Sense 360 is, how you got started, and what you're working on now to grow it even more.
Yeah, so Sense 360 really comes down to the same thing we've been talking about for the last few minutes, which is customer centricity and data. When we were starting the company, one of the things that was fascinating to us is that when a large company wants to build out a new product, or wants to make a change to their business, or wants to create something new, most of the time the process that they go through is they spin up market research. And what usually that means is that they'll go survey a few hundred people, and they'll get insights from those people, and then they'll go and build an incredible investment on the backs of those few hundred people who told them whether they liked it or didn't like this particular strategy. And the good there is that it's a customer-centric approach and it's a data-driven approach. They're starting with the customer and they're collecting a few hundred data points. The problem is that's pretty antiquated in the context of where the world is. Like, it's very hard to make great decisions when you're collecting so little data, and when it takes 6 to 9 months to collect the data and ultimately like build out the PowerPoint that will then inform the strategy. And we felt like with all the new data that's emerging as all of us become more and more digital native, that there was an opportunity to build a business where all that data was already in your hands, so that you could like immediately look at your decision in the context of all the data and make a much, much better decision. But more importantly, that you'd have all the data so you could see how the decision was working as you executed against it. And you could very quickly course correct if it wasn't working or it was working well. So we set out to build the market research platform of the future. And that meant ingesting as many different data sources as we could, building really fast, really great dashboards that companies could use to understand their consumer and understand what they wanted and what they didn't want, and then use that aggregated data to then track and understand over time how those decisions were actually impacting their business and having the ability to course correct. So we're a data platform. We work mostly with retailers and restaurants. We tend to work with the largest retailers and restaurants rather than the medium or the smaller size restaurants. And our goal is hopefully to be able to empower our platform to move downstream over time. But it's a little bit expensive, and it requires some expertise that a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses don't always have in-house.
Yeah, I'll be the first to say, again, as we talked in the background, I remember at one of the brands I was working at was looking into Medallia as that source of truth for their customers and for research to help them make, like you said, big decisions that are maybe 3 or 4 years down the road. So that's super powerful that you have that capability. And I think it definitely has shown that having the data, but actionable data, is super important. It's not just a collection of a lot of data, it's what you can do with it. So it seems like actionable data is the better fit, right, for most brands out there, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we hear from companies all the time is we just have too much data. There's too much data. Like, all of a sudden we went from not having any data to, every tool they have is shooting off data, and they're getting data from all these different places, and they're buying data from other places. The key in all this data is to be able to unlock decisions and make better decisions. And if you can't do that, if it's not actionable, if there's nothing you can do with it, then it's just nice to have. And I think, like, it's both important for companies that are building out data products to make sure that they're actionable and that they understand specifically what levers they're helping companies turn through their data, but also for companies buying data to understand not just that this is cool to have. It's not just good to know that you're doing something better or worse than a competitor. Like, you actually need to know exactly what lever you're going to use. Otherwise, it's probably not worth spending the money.
Right. That's definitely true. I know, considering we work with a lot of retailers, we found that they have a lot of, obviously, their own first party data, but then second party and third party, as well as zero party data. There's so much out there. I mean, there's probably more buzzwords I don't even know about. You're the expert in that. I guess one thing that has been a concern for some brands out there is this impact of consumer privacy, or GDPR over in Europe. How has that impacted what you do, and how would you solve it? I think just from our angle, we always recommend brands to acquire that unique identifier, which is the email or the phone number for first party data. But how do you approach it?
Well, so it's a really great question. And data privacy is, I think, at the core of all of these businesses, because when we started Sense 360, our approach was there's no way to build a long-lasting, sustainable business if the privacy practices aren't really future-proof. And that means taking that customer-centric approach again and saying, how would our customers feel about what we're doing if they understood everything there is to understand? Would they feel good or bad? And if the answer is not great, then it's probably not worth doing, because it's not going to be sustainable. And I think we saw that with some of the things like Apple is doing with the cookies, and like, it's broken a lot of systems and a lot of processes and a lot of innovation that had happened, because at the end of the day, when consumers started to understand what was happening, they weren't comfortable with it. And so I think it is really, really important to not just understand like GDPR and CCPA and any of these regulatory initiatives. They're obviously important to understand, but that's not enough. Like, you still have to take a customer-centric approach and say, is what I'm doing the right thing for the customer? If it is, then I think you can feel good about building on top of it and making it a core strategy, because you can feel good that it'll be sustainable. If not, it just might turn into a lot of work for very short-term profit that doesn't actually end up scaling. And I think the industry itself has gotten really caught up in that. And that was something that was very important to us not to get caught up in. And by the way, if you don't do that, it also becomes really hard to be acquired. It becomes really hard to like get any sort of liquidity. So even just from a purely rational business standpoint, it makes sense to treat privacy really, really cautiously and be on the right side of it.
So how do you see the issues of third-party cookies going away, and that kind of information falling back to zero-party data? And really, that's your only, to coin a phrase, to use a phrase that Isaac used before, that point of truth. How do you see that happening?
Well, I think the first thing is it puts a lot more onus on companies to build out those relationships and to really think about their first party data strategy. Because at the end of the day, if you build trust with your customer and you ask them for their data and they're willing to share it with you, like, that's fantastic. That's not only great from a privacy standpoint, it's also just great business practice. And I think for a lot of the last few years, it became really comfortable to lean on third-party data and to have others work to basically create relationships with your customers and then try to leverage it. Not super sustainable. Like, there are going to be, I think, things that emerge and different ways of doing advertising, and but it's never going to be as powerful as first-party data. And so as a company, what I would do is I would spend a lot of time building out those relationships and that level of support and service and all of the things and machinery you need to do that, because that's going to be the most effective. And then beyond that, just understand the black boxes that you work with so that you understand if they're sustainable or not. Because I've seen too many companies spend too much time working with things that are black box only to have them disappear. And that's just a really, really bad scenario. So in terms of just generally advertising, I think advertising is here to stay. I should just be really clear about that. I think the cookie type of advertising that existed over the last 3 or 4 years, that's going to change. And I think a lot of the really, really low cost acquisition channels are probably gone, but some will emerge and some will come back and just be a little bit less effective and a little bit more expensive. But like, at the end of the day, advertising as an ecosystem isn't going away. It's just probably not going to be quite as good as it was the last few years.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is fantastic. Exactly it. I know we all hear about TikTok advertising now, and there's all these new mediums out there. I think we all remember Clubhouse. I think they're still around. And it's like people are advertising, and like you said, they're getting that customer to come in, and that's where they focus on the retention for, be it a retailer, a convenience store, or restaurant. They're all focused on getting that customer to be a loyal one. And then they probably potentially send that data back out to fuel their acquisition plan. And that's their flywheel. I know Amazon has their massive flywheel, all focused around convenience and selection and price. So how important is that flywheel to brands nowadays to really excel in a customer-centric strategy?
I mean, it's super critical. There's no question about it. So the way I think about it is, acquisition's gotten harder, but retention and engagement has gotten easier, because it's a little more expensive to acquire a customer, but then you build that first party data set, in which you can then use to engage them and retain them and do all of those other things. So it becomes even more critical in a world where it's not so easy to fill the top of the funnel as it used to be, or not so cheap as it used to be. It just makes it even more important to build the whole flywheel and try to generate as much as you can. In terms of using some of the lookalike models and all of those different things that people were doing to sort of tie back the retention and conversion piece all the way back to the acquisition. I mean, that's clearly more challenged, but I think there are still ways to do it. And it's still worth investing in, because if you can do it in a privacy centric way, there's obviously a lot of benefit to it. I just think that if I were to think about the ratio of where I would have spent my time 2 years ago, it'd probably be more on the acquisition side. And obviously you need to spend time on retention and engagement and the first party stuff. But it's like, there was a little bit less incentive to do that because it was so easy to go and acquire customers and it was so cheap to do that. And now that I think that ratio is flipped, and in that flywheel, it's more important to focus on the retention and engagement side of things.
Yeah, and that's really one of our core strategies too, is that, we talk about the flywheel a lot in HiFlyer Digital, but one of the main things that we really focus on is customer retention, because like you said, it used to be very easy to acquire a customer, but now it's easier to retain, but you still have to build that customer relationship. And part of that is growing that, customer interaction with the brand, as well as the way that you interact with the brand. And now that we know, back to the 80-20 rule here, is that you're going to make 80% of your profits from 20% of your customers. So you really should focus that effort on those 20%, because that's retention, that's long-term, that's customer lifetime value. And that's the direction that we see things going. Would you agree?
Well, absolutely, 1000%. I mean, it really comes down to the 80-20 rule. I think is just such a perfect way of summarizing it, because it's so much harder to acquire customers. It's become easier to retain them. And like you said, the distribution of customers and their profitability always looks the same. And it's always that 80-20. So spend as much time on as you can on that 20%. And, there are also so many other benefits. You get to understand what they want and how to serve them. And you can come up with like new business lines and new ways of monetizing them. And so 1000%, I think that's spot on.
Yeah. So I think that there's also a lot of benefits to that customer retention. Something I heard this morning was, I bike ride, and one of the things I do is I listen to either ebooks or podcasts. And, there's that quote that says, people hate being sold to, but they love to buy. So if you give your customer exactly what they want to see, you'll never have to really work for a sale. So especially if you know so much data about your customer, you have so much acquired already, so much information already acquired, then you're not really going to work for that sale. And you don't have to acquire new customers. You just have to work for your existing customer base, and really give them what they want to see.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. It's I think it's a good strategy, and I think it's a lot easier. There are so many things that are hard about business, and if there's a part of it that you can make easier on yourself, I'm a big proponent of that.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, the one thing I always say is that I know you're in the tech world, and so many brands tend to focus on just like 10% of the technology they implement, and they leave a lot of that opportunity on the table. I think also being cognizant of the data at your fingertips, especially the customer data they have at their fingertips, is the difference between, growing or kind of flatlining.
It is. It really is. And it's, going back to the 80-20 rule, it probably does come out that only 20% of the technology you use actually draws most of the benefit, but you need to make sure that you're getting that right 20% and that you're implementing the right 20. And a lot of companies I see miss that because they don't fully integrate everything, and they don't fully spend the time thinking about what parts of the tech stack are going to really drive that meaningful. And that's the risk with the 80-20 rule, is if you don't get the right 20, you're not going to get the 80.
Right.
Sure. So, we're coming up on time here, and I just wanted to reiterate that, Ellie, we went to school a long time ago together, and only until recently did I reach out and say, hey, good to catch up. But I've been following you on LinkedIn for quite a while, and you are a really solid guy, but you're also a solid resource for people who want to, pick a brain, somebody who's done it before, entrepreneurship and growing businesses, and really learning from somebody who has so much experience. So how could our listeners learn more about you? Where can they find you and just connect with you?
Yeah, I love talking about entrepreneurship and business building, and I ebb and flow a little bit on how often I'm writing stuff, but I do try as much as I can to to write and to interact with folks. So I'm on Twitter at ePortnoy, and I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Ellie Portnoy. I don't know what the URL would be, but I am on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect, and love learning from people and love meeting people. And it's been great to get a chance to do this with you, Jakob, and Isaac. And it has definitely been too long, so I'm glad we got a chance to catch up.
Absolutely. So we'll have to do this again. But again, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks so much for coming on this podcast, Ellie. And it's always good to see you and good to hear that you guys are doing well. So this has been another episode of Ecom 80/20 podcast. I'm your host, Jakob Rosenberg, with my partner, Isaac Hyman. And today's special guest is Ellie Portnoy, the founder and SVP of Sense 360. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Ecom 80/20 podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please make sure to subscribe and follow us on social at HiFlyer Digital for daily tips, content, and videos. To put this week's strategy into action and move your brand forward, go to hiflyerdigital.com/book and schedule a free 15-minute chat with Isaac and Jakob. Let's partner together to compete and win at e-commerce. Your brand is worth it. Until next week, this is Isaac and Jakob wishing you a successful and profitable week.